For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes is perfect, able to keep his whole body in check. Right. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole body. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a very small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as the world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creatures can be tamed, and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives or a grapevine figs? No more than salt water yields fresh. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. I was about to say in the name of Ray Lewis, Ray Rice, and Joe Flacco, all that, but I didn't. I am quite mindful that kickoff is in 2 hours and 45 minutes, Janice. So let's get right to the point. The tongue. The tongue. When I was growing up, and I'm sure when you all were growing up, you heard this wonderful expression. If you can't say anything nice, then
Don't say anything at all.
that's right. And James is trying to tell us that in a nice, gentle, pastoral way. If you can't say anything nice, especially if you're a teacher or a preacher, then keep your mouth shut. Or at least fill it with your foot. Because I do that all the time. And at the Vester meeting Thursday night, I had an opportunity to talk uninterrupted for 10 minutes Thursday or so. and I was very careful in what I said. I thought I was so proud. I thought I did so well. But that's what James is talking about. We must be mindful of the power of words. And in this day and generation, we must even be more aware of our words. Because we don't just have speech and we don't write letters anymore. So many things are done by email, text message, Facebook. And if you're not careful, it'll get you in trouble. I don't know how many times I've received an email, turned to Janice and said, "Oh, that pisses me off." And boom, 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 boom. I've typed it. When I was ready to send, I've decided, I better stop. Because I don't know what frame of mind the person was in when they sent it. It's only interpreted through my lens. There's no other lens to interpret. There's no body language. There's no inflection. There's no eye contact. And so when we email one another, we have the very sure possibility of offending someone. Not long ago, I sent an email to a woman who emailed me and asked, "What time was the wedding?" And I wrote back, 3 p.m., and that was it. She called me on the phone to find out why I was so mad at her. She asked a question, I sent the information, that was it. But she thought that I was angry. She asked a question, I answered it, that was it. And I'm sure those of us who email and Facebook have been offended by some email, and there was no tone or inflection or eye contact, and we got offended. So I warn you right here now, if you get an email that makes you angry, stop. Think. Don't do something stupid that will destroy a relationship. Abraham Lincoln always would write a letter with all his emotions and anger and feelings in it, and then he would put it in the desk for a week. And then he would decide to open it up and look at it and decide whether or not to send it. And more often than not, he had calmed down enough that he could send it with, he could change it and send a much more appropriate letter. And this week we have seen the rise and the power of hateful speech. 4 Americans trying to bring peace to a struggling Middle East, a struggling New Libya, were murdered in the consulate in Benghazi. Because some idiot, I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't be so, never, he was or she was an idiot. Anyone who sends a 12-minute video like that out should have better sense. But it was just hateful to call the Prophet Muhammad a child molester. It was hateful to turn on Muslims the way they did and not think that there was going to be any retribution. We forget that there is no eye contact, inflection, or relationship with those in the Arab or Muslim world. We don't have the kind of relationship that we have in the United States. We have been guaranteed free speech since the Bill of Rights was adopted, those first 10 amendments. And any American would hold up and uphold the right of that idiot to speak what he or she said. But we, in this society, might get angry. But we know there are fools out there. There are stupid people out there. There are people who are filled with hate. And their only purpose is to advance their agenda. But in this country, we know and we believe and we uphold that First Amendment right to free speech. But in many of these countries that have gone through the Arab Revolution, there has never been free speech. They have always been controlled by some leader, some king, from some dictator. And I saw this on the news the other day. A young man about John Anderson's age said, "Don't tell me that Obama and Congress didn't know about that. that that video wasn't sanctioned by their government, your government, because the government knows everything that goes on. The government doesn't know what I'm saying right now. We have free speech in this country, and hopefully, other than NSA, no one knows what else is going on. And we are allowed to have the free flow of ideas. But in that part of the world, it's never happened. It's never happened. And so, we have to be more mindful of how we speak. Not just over there, but in church too. Gossip just flies through. I don't understand how I can say something when I walk in the door at 8 o'clock and by beginning of the 10 o'clock service, everybody knows. It's just been, but as I've said many times, gossip is the devil's radio. But we have the power to build up and the power to destroy with our speech. And I have destroyed many people and many things in my life by opening my mouth and speaking things that I did not think through. And I'm sure you all have too. In fact, it's much easier to disagree with someone you don't know than it is to disagree with your wife or your children or your family, because you always have your family with you, but when you're arguing with a stranger, you can walk away and just say the hell with it. But in this world today, you cannot do that, because what I say today is being put on Facebook Monday, and it may be broadcast in Benghazi on Tuesday. So the tongue has mighty power, and we must use it wisely. As Jesus tells us in the Gospel of Mark, don't immediately jump to conclusions, because your idea of God may not be someone else's idea of God. This morning we hear halfway through the book of Mark that Peter says Jesus is the Messiah. And immediately, what does Jesus say? Don't tell anyone. Why? In first century Jerusalem and Israel, the Messiah was envisioned as a warrior who would come and overthrow the Roman Empire and set up a kingdom of righteousness and peace. But it was a military Messiah, one who was going to destroy, burn, pillage, and kick the Romans out and set up a kingdom. That's what Peter thought when he said, you are the Messiah. You are the one. But Jesus is saying, don't tell anyone, because you have a mixed up idea of who God is and who the Messiah is. You cannot put God, nor can you put Christ in a box, because our ideas, our concepts of God are far too small to encompass the greatness of God. In the book of Exodus, Moses goes to the burning bush and he speaks with God and says, tell me your name. And in English, it says, I am who I am. But in Hebrew, it says, I will be who I will be. I will be where I want to be, when I want to be, and how I will want to be. Those three words in Hebrew encompass far more than our English translation. And therefore, God gets put in a box by the Judeo-Christian tradition. That we have this understanding of God and understanding of the truth. But God, in the proper translation, says, I will be God any way I choose to be. To any person I choose to be, in any way that I choose to be. So don't put me in your box, Peter. Don't put me in your box, Eric. I am far greater than you can even imagine.
So are we surprised that there are different religions and there are 3,680 languages, so many different cultures that experience God in a completely different way? There are three great traditions that are monotheistic: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we share a lot in common. And we vary on many, many, many things. But they all have that same inherent belief that God will be who God will be. And when we begin to put God in a box, when we use our speech to say that I am right and you are wrong, then we are no worse than the creatures of God who rose up in hate and anger and killed 4 innocent Americans and 10 Libyans. No, we have not killed people with our speech. Not here and not now. And you say, perhaps in your mind, we're different than that. We're not like that. We've never been like that. Well, let me tell you, just 100 years ago, or 150 years ago this week, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation after the Battle of Antietam. 50 years ago, there were hate groups in this country that spoke hate speech, burned crosses, and wore hoods. African Americans lived in terror. There is still hate speech today against homosexuals. We have not grown that far. We have come a long way in 150 years. We have come a long way in 50 years. And to expect another country that has lived under an authoritative dictator for thousands of years to have the same morals, the same ideas, and the same world understanding as we is crazy. But we cannot tolerate violence and murder. Do not get me wrong. What was done was hate-filled. It was not from God. It was murder. And I believe, as probably all of you, those who were responsible for the murder of Ambassador Stevens need to be held to account. Just like we do. When I talk about Chris, or when I talk about Michael, or when I talk behind Janice's back, we need to be held accountable for when we speak the wrong things. This government has said we do not believe in those statements presented in that film. This church says we do not tolerate hate. But as James says, it is so much easier to say that than it is to act in that way. Because such a small part of the human body can cause so much pain, so much hate, and so much anger that we as Christians are called to watch what we say, especially those of us here. Because imams in the Muslim world, the rabbis in the Jewish world, the priests, pastors, and deacons in this world have more power than we remember, more power than we recognize. We can say something from the pulpit and cause a firestorm. Thank God we only get 32 hits on Facebook. Because sometimes what the church says is radical. Sometimes it's what the world needs to hear. And sometimes it's something I need to hear. Remember the words of James. A bit is put in a horse's mouth so that it can be directed. A small, tiny rudder can steer a big ship. But this is more powerful than either of those, as we've seen this week. So as my Father said, and as you all have repeated, if you can't say anything nice,